On this episode of Death Row Stories,
there were guns everywhere, pointed at us.
You're looking for a murderer. You're not taking any chances.
a witness in a murder case is gunned down on a Philadelphia street.
We would make sure whoever did this crime would get what they deserved.
And police close in on a likely suspect.
We can tie him to this through the cell phone.
But the case doesn't end with his conviction.
The detectives completely disregarded the more obvious suspect.
She noticed that he had blood on his t-shirt and that he had a gun.
The detective whispered to me, "No hope." The fix was in from the beginning to the end.
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered.
Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
2006 was a dangerous year on the Philadelphia streets. Among more than 400 murders, police were called to the scene of a shooting on the city's north side.
On Friday, February 3rd, 2006, police officers assigned to the 23rd Police District responded to a shooting 1500 Seabird Street. Upon arrival, the officers found the victim, Tyreese Gaymon, 23-year-old black male, suffering from gunshot wounds to the chest. A case of this nature, especially a busy year like '06, the squad is getting murders almost on a daily basis. It's all about the victim. We would make sure that whoever did this crime would get what they deserved.
Detectives questioned eyewitnesses who saw Tyreese Gaymon being chased by a man in a black hooded sweatshirt. The stranger cornered Tyreese and opened fire, hitting him 4 times. Police soon learned that Tyreese wasn't just a random victim.
The murder of Tyreese Gaymon is, officials say, a story of intimidation and vengeance.
It's a total heartbreak on our family.
Tyreese had been scheduled to testify in a murder case when he was gunned down.
Tyreese was a witness in this case and had cooperated in the investigation that ultimately led to the arrest of Kareem Glass, a 25-year-old male who is currently incarcerated and awaiting trial.
If he didn't testify, he wouldn't be dead.
In 2006, Philadelphia had the highest murder rate of America's biggest cities. Witness killings compounded the problem faced by an already overtaxed police department.
Witness intimidation really puts the brakes on trying to solve a murder investigation, because if people are in fear for their lives, as they should be, and it's a legitimate worry, they're not willing to cooperate.
Children are dying out here in these streets. This is serious.
Members of the group Men United for a Better Philadelphia say they're outraged by this T-shirt that says, "Stop snitching." They say it's meant to discourage witnesses of violent crimes from speaking with police and promotes a negative so-called street code of silence.
We did an investigative project on the fact that Philadelphia's criminal justice system seemed to be broken. It had one of the lowest conviction rates in America and one of the highest fugitive rates, and a massive problem with unchecked witness fear. The criminal justice system takes that as an affront, you know, when you gun down a witness.
Police zeroed in on Kareem Glass, a suspected drug dealer awaiting his murder trial in jail. Scrutinizing his visitation logs, investigators came across the name of Donte Thomas. Thomas had a lengthy rap sheet, and after eyewitnesses ID'd him as the shooter, police closed in.
You're coming in heavy because you're serving a warrant looking for a murderer. We already know what they did, so you're not taking any chances. This TV stuff of two people in suits and ties knocking on a door doesn't cut it.
It was around 6-something in the morning, and I looked out the window, and it was SWAT people with guns pointing to the windows, you know. So I opened the door, and they was right there in the hallway. They said, "Where Donte at?" And he said, "I'm right here," because he was laying on the futon in the living room.
I remember my mom came in my sister's room, and she was crying. She was like, "Get up, just get up." There were cops' cars outside. We couldn't move. There were guns everywhere. It was something scary. I won't forget it.
And that was it. Then they left and took him out the house. He been going ever since.
With Donte Thomas in custody, detectives pressed him for information about the murder.
In an interview, he said, "Well, you're being charged with a murder of a Tyreese Gaymon." I said, I don't know who that is. He said, "Well, do you know who Kareem Glass is?" I'm like, "I know exactly who Kareem Glass is." They're like, "Okay, well, you conspired with him."
Under questioning, Thomas admitted that he smuggled a cell phone to Kareem Glass in a jail visit, just 3 days before Tyrese's murder.
They asked me, did Kareem Glass ever ask me to do anything for him? And I stated, yes, he did. He asked me to give him some marijuana and a cell phone. At the time, I'm like, if I'm innocent, let me give all these people all the facts, anything that I'm involved in where hopefully they sort this out. And I'm like, I don't know anything about no murder. And he definitely didn't ask me to commit no murder for him. I didn't know that they were going to go down a whole nother road that they went down.
Police charged Donte Thomas with the murder of Tyreese Gaymon. On September 10th, 2007, opening statements began in Thomas's trial. His girlfriend, Tamika, had hired well-known defense attorney Nino Tenari to represent him.
Everybody else was talking about $50,000, and I knew our families didn't have $50,000, so Nino said he would charge us $25,000. He made me think that he would do his job. You know, I thought that Donte would definitely be home.
Veteran prosecutor Mike Berry argued the case for the state and painted Thomas as a hitman, taking orders from Kareem Glass.
This is a portion of the statement from Mr. Berry. Tyreese Allen was killed because he was a witness on another homicide. We know that Kareem Glass is the person who had the motive to kill Tyreese. We know that Donte Thomas is a good friend. We know he fits the description of the shooter. I remember him telling us that it wasn't going to be like Law and Order. He said, you watch TV and, you know, all of the evidence lines up very much like a puzzle. And this particular case was not going to be like Law and Order. And I remember that because at the end of the case, it was kind of like Law and Order because they did have a lot of evidence that did kind of line up.
The prosecution called 2 witnesses, cousins of the victim, who had identified Thomas in photo arrays.
The way they described what happened, they were absolutely sure, like, that's the boy who shot at my cousin and chased him into the alley. So for me, it was, you know, pretty compelling.
On September 18th, 2007, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before reaching a verdict.
Next thing you know, Nino called and was like, y'all come on back to the courtroom and it don't look good. And it wasn't good. They said he was guilty real fast. That part happened real quick.
Donte Thomas was sentenced to death by lethal injection.
I didn't believe that Nino Teneri put on any defense, so I knew that I was getting convicted, and I watched everything play out. I would have convicted me based off this presentation. My family was there, all the cops was there, and I turned to look back at my family, and the lead detective whispered to me, "No hope." I was processing what death would be like, especially for something you didn't do. Actually, it was another death row inmate that said, "No, calm down, young man. Listen, there's a process here." And that's what put me on my drive to learn everything about that process.
Donte is not a follower, so you can't tell him what to do. Donte does what he wants to do. He started sneaking out the house, and then he started thinking that my rules was too strict. When he was 13 years old, he had taken someone's earrings. We went to court. They sent him away for a while, and he did his time and came home.
Before I started getting in trouble, I started getting in trouble with my mother. I would run away because she wouldn't want me to hang with a certain group of people. I would go run away and hang with the guys on 11th Street. You got prostitutes out there, you got drug dealers out there, and we're kids watching it.
By the time Donte was in his mid-20s, he was a low-level drug dealer. In 2003, life on the streets caught up to him.
The first time I got shot was over a fight. I won the fight, and he came back and shot me.
First time he got shot 5 times. 2 years later, he got shot 15 times throughout his whole body.
His arm was hanging off from his shoulder, and he had staples in his chest and staples in his arm. He had a rod in his hip on the right side from his hip to his knee because his femoral bone in his thigh was shattered. And they had to put that rod in there, which is still there.
It left me disabled completely. I had stents put in my heart and half of my lung removed. It broke my arm completely, and it was devastating.
6 months after Donte was shot, he was arrested for the murder of Tyreese Gaymon. Donte's mother studied nursing and was helping him recover when Tyreese was gunned down.
His hand was constricted, and he's walking with a cane. This is why I was like, I couldn't understand how could they even suggest he did something like that. He couldn't shoot a gun. I used to document things I do in my little calendar books, because this is my child, and I was writing down things that needed to be brought up to give to Nino Teneri, his attorney. But he never brought that to the jury. He never let them know that.
Donte's attorney, Nino Teneri, was a prominent litigator, known for his handling of high-profile cases in Philadelphia. But as the trial date approached, Donte began to feel neglected.
As it was getting closer and closer to trial, Donte was like, "Nino need to come talk to me. He still ain't come up here." Then I would ask Nino. He just would say, "I'm going up there." Next thing you know, he was saying, "I'll talk to him right before trial."
The defendant didn't really put on a strong defense. They were saying like his finger hurt or like his hand hurt and he couldn't have shot the gun. And I thought that wasn't as believable of a defense, which made me question like his truthfulness.
The day of jury selection, I say, "Nino, can we talk about this case?" He said, "No, listen, let's focus on picking the right jury." Then after jury selection, we spun right into trial, like immediately. So I was always behind the 8 ball, and the fact that I was illiterate to everything dealing with the law, I was pretty much in for the ride.
This is a letter from Nino Teneri after Donte was found guilty. Dear Donte, you know that I have the deepest respect for you and your family. As you were disappointed with the results, so was I. Very truly yours, Nino V. Teneri. Nino could have did more, way more.
Now on death row, Donte began searching for a new attorney to handle his appeals.
Guy up here, he was already through the process, and I asked him, I said, if you could do it all over again, what attorney would you use? And he said, well, the only ethical lawyer I ever ran into was Terry Heimbaugh.
Terry Heimbaugh was an appeals attorney with a reputation for fighting wrongful convictions.
Dear Ms. Heimbaugh, this is Donte Thomas. As of today, I've been on death row for exactly 7 years now for a crime I did not commit. It takes a lot for me to trust a client. I trust but verify. Never forget that my clients often will try and tell me things that they think that I want to hear as opposed to the truth.
As Terry investigated Donte's case, she learned his attorney, Nino Teneri, had never visited him prior to trial.
There's a rule. If you're going to represent a capital defendant, because the stakes are so high, that you must have at least one in-person meeting. An attorney's failure to visit a capital defendant prior to trial is ineffective assistance of counsel, violating the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Terry also discovered there were several witnesses who could have given Donte an alibi for the time of the murder. But Nino Teneri never called them to testify. To get answers, Terry turned to private investigator Jeff Stein.
The first person I sat down with and spoke to was Tamika, his girlfriend or fiancée at that time. Tamika gave a very detailed overview of that morning when the murder happened, that she was in bed with Donte. They were in their apartment together. They had a friend of hers at the time who was living with them.
Tasia was a friend of mine. Tasia came to stay with me because she didn't have anywhere to go with her baby.
I didn't recall seeing anything about her in the police reports. That's when a red flag goes up for an investigator. You need to speak to everybody.
Donte's house guest, Tasia, also had critical information, but she was never called to testify.
She shared with me that there was 2 people the morning of the shooting that came to the house. And the first person that came, she opened the door and she noticed that he had blood on his t-shirt and that he had a gun, and he asked for Donte.
A female acquaintance of Tamika's woke me up and said, you got company at the door. So I go to the door and it's wanted. And he was already talking when I came in there, and it was reckless talk of shootings and stuff like that. I said, hope you got roll.
Kwashimi Wagner, also known as Wanted, was a more likely suspect, and notably, several months after this crime took place, he was arrested for shooting 2 individuals.
Donte told Terry that he'd first met Wanted 3 days before the murder.
When I visited Kareem Glass, he happens to be at the jail trying to visit him as well. They asked us, do we want to go in together? I didn't mind. How I'm familiar with Wanted, he was a rapper from the neighborhood. And I have some friends who work in studios, and Glass was introducing us for that purpose solely. After the visit, Wanted drove me home and dropped me off at my house. We talked for a few minutes. I told him I would make some contacts with some people in the studios for him, and he left.
Donte says the next time he saw Wanted was when he showed up at Donte's door with blood on his clothing, moments after Tyreese Gaymon had been killed. Despite witnesses to this visit, the encounter was never brought up at Donte's trial.
There was never, ever any evidence presented that Wanted was an alternative suspect, much less that Wanted showed up the day of the crime 10 minutes after with blood on him. Had counsel done his homework, so to speak, he could have pointed the finger very easily at Wanted. Because counsel didn't speak with Donte a single time substantively about the case, he had no idea the significance that Wanted had, and he never bothered to call Wanted.
Prosecutors believed Wanted may have been involved, but they never had enough evidence to indict him.
The detectives made a determination of who they wanted to be the doer, and then they made sure that the evidence all pointed in that direction. And they completely disregarded the more obvious suspect.
Why did the police set their eyes on Donte? I don't know. I can speculate. It's to close one chapter. He's been involved with other shootings, other drug dealings, and now his name is being brought up.
They couldn't put one on death row. He was a kid. On paper, I was a bad guy.
Among the case files, Terry learned there were other witnesses to the murder, whose descriptions of the shooter pointed towards Wanted.
They said that the shooter was a red-boned male, meaning light-skinned African-American. As you can see in these pictures, Wanted is a light-skinned African-American.
There was a person standing in the alley looking at the shooting, and he described the guy as about 6 feet, red bone. That's not my son. He's darker than I am.
While some witnesses had picked Donte out of a photo array, the way Donte's image was used raised questions.
Normally what happens is that there's supposed to be a minimum of 7 pictures, people similar to one another in complexion, in height, in weight, and age. It should be a current picture and just one picture of that particular person.
Photo arrays in a police lineup can be very suggestive. And in this particular case, they had 2 sets of photo arrays, and they had Donte's picture on both of them. He's the only person that was duplicated on these photo arrays.
Someone who was a witness, even if they don't pick that individual from the array, the fact that they've seen that same person show up in the array several times lends them more likely to pick that individual as being the person they saw. Eyewitness testimony is tricky to start with. There is a lot of scientific evidence that there's a tremendous amount of witness misidentification that goes on. In fact, the vast majority of wrongful convictions are caused by misidentification of witnesses.
Prosecutors had argued that Donte committed murder as a hitman, but that theory was about to be tested. On September 18, 2007, the same day Donte was convicted of murder, Kareem Glass was charged with ordering the hit.
The Commonwealth's theory of the case was that Kareem Glass had hired Donte to kill Tyreese in order to prevent him from testifying against Kareem Glass. The irony is that Donte was convicted and Mr. Glass was not.
In 2008, while Donte Thomas was on Pennsylvania's death row, Assistant DA Mike Berry turned his attention to Donte's alleged co-conspirator, Kareem Glass.
Mike Berry had a very good reputation for being a very, very zealous prosecutor. He represented the Commonwealth in the Kareem Glass case as well as Donte's case.
Mike was a very hard-nosed, very dedicated prosecutor. What I would call him is a true believer. And he believed that he was wearing the white hat. He believed that he was doing justice. I think he saw everything black and white and didn't see a lot of gray.
During Donte's trial, Mike Berry had successfully argued that Glass ordered Donte to commit murder. But when Glass's day in court came, his attorney, Jack McMahon, argued otherwise.
Conspiracy is an agreement between two people to do a specific act. So they would have to show that Kareem and Donte agreed. They made an agreement, whether it be by a phone, by a message. From what I saw, there was no evidence to suggest that Kareem Glass conspired with Mr. Thomas to do this.
At the center of Mike Berry's argument was the cell phone Donte had smuggled into Glass in jail.
The worst I did was give Kareem Glass some marijuana and a cell phone. That was it. And that's the only real conspiracy piece of evidence that tied me and Glass in.
I think what happened is Donte came in to the police department and told them that he had assisted smuggling in the cell phone. I think that the detectives determined that he's our most likely suspect and that we can then tie him to this through the cell phone.
The prosecution argued that Kareem Glass made 118 calls from the smuggled cell phone, allegedly planning the crime with Donte.
I spent hours calling those 118 phone numbers to determine whether any of them had any relationship to Donte, Donte's family, Donte's friends, Donte's girlfriend, and there was no connection at all between any of these 118 calls and Donte Thomas.
While phone records were brought up in court, the state could never produce the cell phone used by Kareem Glass.
They claim that this phone was confiscated. However, when we subpoenaed that information from the prison records in Philadelphia, there was no documentation of any cell phone that was found.
Ultimately, Mike Berry decided to drop the conspiracy charges against Glass, raising the question of how Donte was convicted on the same evidence.
I don't think if it hadn't been for the 118 calls, that there would have been as easy for the jury to convict Donte.
What happened was Nino Teneri didn't understand the evidence. Had he asked me anything about the 118 calls, I would have let him know me and Kareem Glass never had any conversation on a cell phone.
The weapon was never found. There's no forensic evidence linking Donte to the crime at all.
Kareem Glass contacted me and said, yo, I read your opinion, man. They use evidence against you that don't exist. I compared the paperwork, and it's like they went to his trial, told a whole nother story. The fix was in from the beginning to the end.
Kareem Glass was convicted of first-degree murder on October 21, 2008. But prosecutors were never able to tie him to the murder that had landed Donte Thomas on death row. From Glass's trial, Donte learned that he was first implicated in his case by a jailhouse snitch named Eddie Almodovar.
Eddie Almodovar really was the invisible man because he never was a witness. He had a huge impact on this case, and yet he was always behind the scenes. He was never put in front of the jury. They were never asked to make a credibility determination on him. And yet it was because of his testimony that the spotlight was turned on Donte.
Almodovar had told police that Glass had confided in him about the murder.
This is a statement from a homicide unit of Eddie Almodovar. Mr. Glass said, I'm going to tell you something, don't tell nobody. Don's the one that killed him. He did that favor for me. That's my boy.
He said Kareem Glass had admitted to him that his guy, Donte, had taken care of the witness in his case, and that this was done as a favor to him in order to protect Kareem from the prosecution.
Despite Almodovar's claim, the prosecution never called him to present the supposedly damning information at Donte's trial.
It was key to me to see that that was left out. Oftentimes you can find where the Commonwealth's case has problems by looking at what they don't present.
Prison snitches are rampant around our system, particularly the higher level of the case, the more serious the case, the more the snitches come out of the woodwork. Those types of snitches, to me, almost should be illegal. I mean, there are guys in prison usually trying to just save themselves or try to gain something for themselves. You know, they're just inherently unreliable.
Terry took a close look at Almodovar's prison records, and what she discovered further threw his statement into question.
The day after the murder, Glass got put in the restricted housing unit, where he is single cell status, no contact with any other individuals. Glass and Almodovar would not have even been able to even communicate through the bars to each other. It was not possible. Physically just wasn't possible. When you start looking at all of this, it becomes much more obvious that this was a fabricated case, that this was made up in order to justify who that they've decided was the perpetrator.
This whole thing, this whole city, criminal justice system is jacked up. It's been jacked up. It ain't just get like this. It's been this way, and it needs to be fixed.
At the time of Donte's conviction, Philadelphia had the highest incarceration rate of America's largest cities. Officials here had long taken a hardline approach towards justice.
Philadelphia's criminal justice system was probably largely shaped by two people, and that's Frank Rizzo, who was the police commissioner in the 60s and then later became the mayor, and District Attorney Lynn Abraham, who was the top city prosecutor for about 20 years here. And they both prided themselves on being very tough customers. Rizzo was kind of a proto-Trump, conservative, law and order guy to the max. He once boasted that his police department could invade Cuba and win.
You know, we took the Black Panthers on. 3 of my guys shot. Not one Panther shot. And all the opportunity in the world to do it. We don't do things like that. We're professionals. We don't enforce the law and met out punishment. We just apprehend, leave that to the judicial system. But we hope that they would get a little tougher.
Like Rizzo, District Attorney Lynn Abraham set the tone for her prosecutors. During her tenure, 108 people, including Donte Thomas, were sentenced to death row.
Abraham, in her own way, was equally tough and conservative. She was labeled America's deadliest DA, and that reflected the fact that her office sought and obtained so many death sentences.
You don't meet a tougher prosecutor than I am. Don't give me any excuses if you've robbed or killed somebody that your mother didn't love you. I'm really not interested. You're responsible, you have to pay the price.
Her office and the prosecutors that she had there went all out for the death penalty. I guess their job is to get the conviction rates. It was more so of conviction than fairness.
In 2017, Philadelphia's citizens elected civil rights attorney Larry Krasner as DA. Krasner vowed to reform the criminal justice system.
That vision is of a criminal justice system that makes things better, that is just, that is based on preventing crime, and is based on building up society rather than tearing it apart.
Krasner's election gave new hope to Donte and other defendants who believed they were victims of overreaching prosecutors.
Krasner was a prominent defense attorney in town who had handled many cases representing victims of police abuse. And he sort of came out of nowhere to win the office. He's pledged to try to reverse unfair verdicts and take an objective look at, at controversial murder cases.
In my opinion, the criminal element in the city is very happy with what's going on in the DA's office. Defense attorneys, they're salivating. They can't wait to get into a courtroom because they know they're going to walk in one door and the defendant's going to walk out another.
I want what you want. I want justice. And no, I will never seek the death penalty.
Philadelphia's new DA, Larry Krasner, took office on January 2nd, 2018. 3 days later, he sprang into action.
It was an extraordinary sight this afternoon. Over 24 prosecutors from the Philadelphia's DA's office were axed, and their departures were played out in public for all to see.
The purge was on full display as the file boxes kept rolling out of the DA's office. 31 staffers, including a number of murder squad prosecutors, high-ranking deputies, and division chiefs, were among those terminated.
One of the first things that Larry Krasner did when he took office was to clean house. And he cleaned house of individuals who didn't have the same vision that he had. And that included Michael Berry, the prosecutor in Donte's case.
He let a lot of the staff go, particularly in the homicide unit. He thought that the homicide unit was overly zealous, too bent on winning as opposed to delivering justice.
With the new progressive DA in charge, Terry hoped that Donte's conviction would be thrown out.
We're hoping to have a post-conviction appellate hearing where we anticipate we have multiple claims of ineffective assistance of counsel and prosecutorial misconduct. Donte's not interested in just serving life in prison. He wants to get back to his family.
I hope that the evidence is presented and interpreted for what it is. I'm an innocent man put on death row, and I should be back home with my family. That's what I hope.
But in early 2019, Krasner's office unexpectedly filed a motion to dismiss Donte's appeal. It will now be up to the Pennsylvania Court of Common Pleas whether to re-examine Donte's case.
Well, I gave it to God, and I'm thinking positive. And the way that his case is going so far, I trust and believe that he should be exonerated.
Now I speak to Donte every day. Several times a day we talk. I know he got a good chance of coming home. I don't want to think that he's not coming home. I don't ever have that thought in my head that he's not coming home.
I haven't touched my dad since I was 5 years old. I haven't physically hugged him. I feel like Joe, it took my dad from me. And I didn't have, the male figure I needed. And, I needed him most. I'm grown now, so it's it's not really much you can teach me that my mom didn't.
While Donte's family suffers from his absence, they haven't lost sight of the victim's family.
I'm sad and so sorry that they were served this fake justice. The young man deserved better than that. Their family deserved better than that.
I think it was bad and tough for both families. I know it was with this family. And if they love this loved one like we love Donte, yes, then I'm sure that it was rough with them. And being a mother or a grandmother, whoever, if you got love in your heart, it's gonna be tough on you. Yeah, it's gonna be rough.
Terry has been working on Donte's appeals for over a decade.
While his case is pending appeal, his execution is stayed. I go to bed each night knowing that if I don't do my job to the very best of my efforts, that someone could die on my watch. And that's something I think about all the time.
I maintain hope by learning everything there is to know about the law, by educating myself every day and studying and reading and practicing, because you need all the information you can get to fight for your life back.